Hello and welcome to the first AOPA Air Safety Institute safety webinar of 2021, Proficiency 101, Creating Your Personalized Plan for Safe Flight. My name is John Collins. I'm the Manager of Aviation Safety Programs for the AOPA Air Safety Institute and your host for this webinar, along with Alicia Herron, and we'll introduce her in just a moment. But a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please make sure you've muted your microphones, and if you have any technical issues, we won't be able to troubleshoot them during the webinar, but if you log out and log back in, that usually clears up the problem. We will take questions throughout the presentation and answer as many as we can before the end of the webinar. So use the question mark on your PC or laptop control panel located on the right side of your screen, or the question mark at the top of the screen on your tablet or smartphone to submit them. Our webcams will be available throughout the webinar, and so for those of you who are on computers, we should appear to the left of your screens. If you're on a tablet, we'll be on top of the presentation. And if you're watching this on a smartphone, you may need to swipe left or right to view the cameras. Wings credit is available for this webinar, and if you signed up for this webinar with your FAA Wings account email, you'll receive credit automatically to your Wings account within the next 2 business days. A recording of this webinar will be available via the Air Safety Institute webpage, www.airsafetyinstitute.org, and you will receive an email with a direct link as well. If you missed any of our previous webinars, you can find them at webinars.aopa.org. And again, in 2021, just like we did in 2020, if you're using the AOPA Pilot Passport app, a part of the AOPA app, attendance at this webinar will earn you an ASI webinar badge at 1,000 points, and I'll have more details on how you can get that at the end of the webinar. As I mentioned before, for those of you who may not know me, my name is John Collins, and I'm the Manager of Aviation Safety Programs and the Chief Flight Instructor here at the Air Safety Institute. I started flying in 1984. I actually started flying in gliders because my sister was taking horseback riding lessons, and there was a glider field near her stable, and I'd watch them go fly, and I finally bugged my parents to let me go take some rides in the glider. I didn't get the license or the certificate at that time, but I went on to college and earned a commercial certificate with single engine, multi-engine instrument airplane ratings. Then I went into the Army, didn't do any flying for a few years, and then came out and decided I needed to get my CFI certificate and start working as a full-time flight instructor. A couple years of that, and my wife told me it was time for me to get a better paying job with better hours. And so since we lived near AOPA, an opening was here, and so I became an AOPA employee in 1998. And I worked in our pilot information center on the hotline for 3 years, went upstairs, worked in our government affairs department, defending airports across the country for 14 years, and finally ended up here in the Air Safety Institute, where I've been working with good folks like my friend Alicia Herron. Alicia.
Hello, I'm Alicia Herron. As John said, I'm an aviation writer for the Air Safety Institute. I started flying in 2010, took an intro flight, and decided that it was what I wanted to do, and I've been flying pretty continuously since then. I earned my Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Science from Rocky Mountain College a little while ago, and after that went out to the Outer Banks of North Carolina and flight instructed, towed banners and citabrias, and gave air tours over first flight and where the Wright brothers flew for the first time. Commercial airplane, single engine land, multi-engine land, instrument airplane. I'm a double I and an AGI, and I love tailwheel flying. And I'm speaking to you from sunny Southern California. And I hope everybody's having a great evening, and thanks for joining us. So now that you know a little bit about John and myself, let's do a couple of polls to learn more about you.
All right. So you can see our first poll is asking you what level of pilot certificate do you hold. If you happen to be a sport pilot, please go ahead and click the private pilot button. My apologies for not getting that in there, but all right, we're doing really well on getting the totals in here. When we're done with the poll, we'll show the results up on the screen for you. Looks like we have a majority of private pilots with some commercial and ATP, a few CFIs, some student pilots. Awesome. All right, we'll keep the polls open here for about another 10 seconds. Looking good. All right, I'm going to share the results with you. And you can see we have a majority of private pilots with us. Like I said, some student pilots, some commercial pilots, ATPs, and CFI. So welcome, thank you for joining us. Another question for you. Are you instrument rated? All right. About 43% of you are not, and about 30 of you are and current and proficient at the same time. Good, very good. And about 20%, 15 to 20% instrument rated but not current or proficient. We'll keep that poll open here in just a few more seconds. And we'll go ahead and share the results. Okay, there you go.
That's interesting.
Yep. And one last question for you, because we do want to find out how often you fly. Is it weekly, 2 to 3 times a month, 2 or 3 times a quarter, 1 to 2 times every 6 months, 1 to 2 times a year? Just trying to figure out, on average, how often are you able to get up and fly? And if your flying was impacted by the pandemic last year, please go ahead and use 2019 as a reference point for that. But if you've been able to fly, awesome, that's great. So it looks like about 39% of you, or 40%, are able to get out and fly weekly. That's great. And then another 37% are flying 2 to 3 times a month. 18%, 19%, about 2 to 3 times a quarter. There's only a very few that are 1 to 2 times a year, but I can certainly understand that. All right, we'll keep this open for just a few more seconds here. Great. We'll share the results. Looks like most of you are out there flying, and that's good. Whether it's about a third of you weekly, 38% 2 to 3 times a month. So awesome. Glad to see that you're able to get out there and do that. So why are we doing this? Well, obviously we just came through a fairly rough year in terms of getting out there and flying, although a lot of you seem to be doing that, which is great. But accidents reports show some areas that could still use some improvement. And so these numbers are coming out of the 2018 null report. In that last report, the 30th null, pilot-related accidents are down somewhat, but they're still the majority of the accidents that are occurring out in the general aviation community. Landing accidents account for the majority of them, 322, but in 2018, only 1 fatal. Takeoff accidents, descent and approach accidents, fuel management still is a very big category. Maneuvering accidents and weather is the most lethal, with 21 out of 23 accidents that year being fatal accidents. So, there's obviously room for improvement. There's things that we need to talk about, the things that we need to pay attention to, and so this is going to be part of that discussion. The FAA has also identified areas of emphasis that they would like to see pilots and flight instructors work on. If you are familiar with Advisory Circular 61-98, which covers currency and offers guidance on the conduct of flight reviews and instrument proficiency checks, they highlight the following areas of concern. Loss of control, which we've heard about for a long time, been talking about that. They've identified some areas where that is a particular issue. Certainly when it comes to pilot proficiency, that is an area that shows up quite a bit if we're not proficient. Loss of control accidents seem to occur a little bit more often. Traffic pattern operations, they have some very good detail on stabilized approaches. VFR into IMC is also an issue. In addition, manual flight after automation failure is an issue that they're highlighting in that particular AC, along with runway incursion risks and avoidance. That is still a concern for the FAA, and general aviation is still a big part of that. In addition to that, they also point out for the flight instructors in the group, CFI responsibility and our commitment to the safety culture and how we can grow that culture across our GA community. And as we were sitting and trying to plan out our webinars for 2021, we sat around and thought about this. And for me, in this past year, I flew about 58 hours Most of it was instruction. In fact, when I went back and looked at my logbook, only about 3 flights out of 45, 46 flights were personal flights, flights that I was actually totally the piloting control, physically operating the controls, flying the airplane. Now, I know on a lot of the instructional flights, I did do demonstrations and stuff like that, but I had to ask myself, am I really proficient? And that's a great question. It's a question I'm a little embarrassed to say that, well, maybe I'm not as proficient as I thought I was, and perhaps I need to get out and do more. So that is an area for me in this year, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the webinar. Alicia, what about you?
So I'm the opposite of you. In the last year, I've definitely done far more personal flying than instruction. A lot of that has to do with just where I am and how the pandemic has affected the area here. And it's just, I'm not really willing at this time to accept a bunch of new students and open up that risk factor to the pandemic. I don't really need to do that. So the vast majority of my flying has been solo. It's been local, which has also been based on local guidance, because there was a time where they were suggesting not to leave the county. So I have been doing a bunch of pattern work, a bunch of local flying, a bunch of just short little hops, and only recently have been getting, and in accordance with the guidelines and stuff, been able to go on flights a little further away. So from a flight instructing perspective, I am not proficient. I would not consider myself like proficient at flight instructing right now. And so I think it's important to note that both of us as flight instructors are, admitting this to each other and admitting it to ourselves, that there are places, even as CFIs, that we know that we have to get better at to be safer.
Right.
So getting into that, we can talk about where you can start with your proficiency plan. So before we can talk about proficiency, we need to talk about currency. And it seems like a lot of you are flying quite a lot, which is great, and are current. But if you're not, and if you get to a point where you're not, or if you were looking at your 2019 numbers, we have to take into consideration that, life happens, and sometimes flying is not the priority. For John and myself, we're lucky enough to be able to make flying a priority sometimes, or I think that I am. It's a huge part of my life. And so even when the pandemic was at its height in the first lockdown, and everybody was, there was a question of whether or not GA flying was acceptable, there was only about a month off that I took off from flying. So I was lucky enough to not get to a point where I thought that I needed to fly with an instructor again to be safe. But that being said, that might not be the case for everyone. So think about, a 6-month guideline is a good guideline to say, do I need to fly with an instructor again? But that doesn't have to be what you use. It's also based on your comfort levels. And especially if you're flying in an airplane that you might not be as familiar with, or if you're getting checked out in something new, then think about that as well. If you haven't flown in 2 years or more, or just feel very rusty, take a look at the AOPA You Can Fly Rusty Pilots program, which is online, and they provide webinars as well. So there are definitely resources out there for you to use to get back to a place where you can start talking about not just currency but proficiency. But this is definitely the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had some long gaps in my flying career. I had 4 years off when I wasn't flying, when I was in the military. And actually, I look back, there are 2 flights in my logbook, and both of them were flight review and checkout flights at various flying clubs. But then when I got out of the military and got married and settled down, my wife was still in the Navy at the time, and so I was able to become part of a flying club at the Norfolk Naval Naval Base, and got into flying that way, and thought, well, okay, I can, I've done 2 or 3 flights, I'm ready to start working on my CFI certificate. Not even close. And that was a pretty big eye opener for me. So I backed off of doing that, got into flying with Civil Air Patrol, and started getting back and getting current and proficient again. And that was a good way to do it. More recently, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I ended a longer drought of flying. I'd gotten busy at work, and even though we work here at AOPA, it is sometimes difficult to cut away and go out and fly and keep proficiency. And I let my medical lapse and a few other things. So it was difficult. But when Basic Med came out, that helped me get back into the flying, back into the left seat, and then was able to do that. So I got back into it and started working on that. And then in the Air Safety Institute, our boss is very very focused on us being, active flight instructors and active pilots, and so that's really great. So that took off some of the pressure for that. So, but as you mentioned, Alicia, getting proficient currency versus proficiency, and we know, everybody on here knows about currency, flight review. Once, if you need to have had a flight review within the 24 months preceding the flight you're going to take. If you're going to carry passengers, 3 takeoffs and landings within the last 90 days. If you're at night, it needs to be a full stop. If it's in a tailwheel aircraft, then day or night, it needs to be a full stop. So if you're an instrument pilot, and we have many of those on the webinar today, IFR currency, of course, 6 approaches, holding navigation within the previous 6 months before your flight. And if you don't have that, then you need to get out and get an instrument proficiency check with a double I. So proficiency is definitely different than current, because you can be current, you can have, you can be at day 89 on your 3 takeoffs and landings, and you can be in the 24th month of your flight review and not have done anything in the previous 89 days. Are you really proficient? I would argue probably not. I know if I go more than a couple of weeks, I know I'm itching to get back into it and to make sure that I'm, doing what I can and working the rust off. And that's a continual process. So one of the things I use is, of course, the Airman Certification Standards or the PTS, depending on what kind of aircraft you're flying. And remember, those standards are actually minimums, and you want to try to be better than it. A private pilot standard is 200 feet plus or minus 200 feet on your altitude, plus or minus 15 degrees on a heading. Commercial pilot, plus or minus 100 feet, plus or minus 10 degrees. So challenge yourself. Can I get back to those standards again that I did when I took the check ride? And my check rides are way distant. So I have to work at that to continue to keep those standards up. And recency is a big part. Now, after that 7-year gap that I was talking about, I went back and I took a flight review. Actually, I did a phase of the wings program because I knew that my skills were not going to be sharp. And so I did a phase of the wings program. And even after the first couple of flights, the motor skills were there for the most part. I don't think I had a lot of problems with that. There were some avionics that were in there that I hadn't kept up with, so there were some GPS issues that I had to learn. The switchology and knobology, that sort of thing, the flow. But actually flying the airplane wasn't that bad. But putting that all together and getting the mental picture and staying ahead of the airplane and really understanding what I was doing, that took a lot more work. And so that is something we want to focus on when we're trying to develop a proficiency plan. So, one of the things we'll talk about here is personal minimums. And personal minimums are pretty important. They form the box that you fly within. Where are you comfortable flying? And if you've talked to me at air shows or on the phone or via an email, you know that I have a standard speech that I give. That you take the personal minimums contract, right, and you sit down and you go about it deliberately. And if you fly with somebody, if you fly with a spouse, if you fly with a friend, if you fly with an instructor, definitely get your instructor involved in this and sit down and figure out, where are you comfortable? What weather minimums are you comfortable with, day and night, wind, visibility, ceiling? How often should you have flown to be comfortable? If I haven't flown an hour within the last 30 days, I probably need to talk to somebody about going up. And it may not be another instructor, it might be another pilot who can just give me some critique, and most of my friends are pretty good at doing that, so we can get that going. But and this is a bad example. This is not actually filled out in pen, but I always tell people, fill it out in pencil. And the reason for that is that your personal minimums are going to change as your experience increases or decreases. Your recency is, it gets older and older. You may want to sit down and make those changes. So fill it out in pencil, but sign it in ink. Commit to it. Actually sign it. Have somebody witness it. That flying partner, that flying buddy, the friend with flying benefits, whatever it is, whoever it is, have them witness it. And then commit to it. Put it in your bag, put it on your knee board, whatever it is you need to do to make sure it's there, and consult it. And if the conditions don't match up with your minimums, get somebody to go with you, another instructor or another pilot, and fly. And I say this because the regulations are written in blood, and I don't want to see any of you that we're talking to today be part of a future webinar. All right, that's not my goal. My goal is to work myself out of a job, and that would be great. But so for ASI, we have the resources. You can go online. You can look at the VFR contract. We have an IFR contract as well. You see the links up there, aviasafetyinstitute.org/VFR contract or /IFR contract. The FAA has lots of resources as well. FAAsafety.gov is just a plethora of courses, of information, links to other material that you can get to and look at. They have their version of a pilot minimums checklist, and again, you put these down, you write them down, and you rely on them so that you don't feel pressured into a situation that you really don't feel comfortable flying in, and it's something that you can fall back on. The worst thing you can do is pull these out in flight and modify them while you're flying in a condition that you're not. It's okay. I think I can. I remember 10 years ago I flew in 1003, and I was pretty good. It was it's VFR marginal, but I can do it.
Yeah.
Well, that was 10 years ago, and maybe you had a lot of recency at that point in time, and you had some experience, and had exposure to it. You're not going to have that necessarily at this point in time. So don't change your minimums if you're in the air. Do it in a considered fashion on the ground. And I know I'm preaching, but that's really what you need to do, because there are a lot of us that don't have written minimums. A colleague of mine, a blogger, Jolie Lucas, she's up in Northern California. She wrote an article called "Into the Mouth of the Alligator," and in a very informal survey of her friends, her flying friends, she asked them, well, how many of you have personal minimums? And while most of them had an idea of, I'm not going to fly in this, or I'm not going to fly in that, only 25%, and this was a group of 12, so 3 people, including Jolie, had written them down and had committed to them. So, I encourage you to write them down. Use our form, use the FAA's form, do your own form. I don't care, but commit to it and commit to flying within that boundary. And if you want to expand the boundary, let's do it with a CFI or do it with another pilot that can help you do that safely. So let's talk about the details. Now, your mileage may vary. Why MMV? All right. What I might be able to do may not be what Alicia can do, may not be what somebody in Dubuque, Iowa can do, or in Florida or Minnesota, wherever. But think about, how often can I fly? I think, Alicia, you said something, you want to fly once a week, right? That's your goal to do that.
That's my goal for the year, is to fly at least once a week. Hopefully.
At least once a week.
I'm already behind, unfortunately, but I'll make up for it.
All right. And so, how often can you fly? And that's gonna be a factor of several things. Of course, aircraft availability, weather, and the most important thing, a budget. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's going to impact how often you can fly. And be realistic about it. It's, oh yeah, I want to go do X, Y, and Z. Well, that's going to take A, B, and C to do that. So, as an example, this year I'd like to finally get my seaplane rating, single engine seaplane. It's been something I've been lusting after for a while, and it's been a pretty mild winter so far. But
yeah, it's been real mild out here.
But it might be time to go down to Florida and add that rating. Now I'm going to probably have to do it in a Super Cub, and depending on where I go, that's going to be somewhere around $2,100, give or take. And that's just the flying part of it. And I'm being kind of Pollyannish and not considering the travel down, the hotel, that sort of thing. But I'm just focusing on the cost of the flying. So that's about $2,100 to do that. And if I have a budget of, say, I don't know, $5,000 or $6,000 for personal flying, That's a third of it gone right there. And I'm not going to be able to do once a week like Alicia's trying to do. Maybe you have some dreams that you want to accomplish. Maybe you want to fly to Oshkosh, waggle your wings and land on the spot. You know, that a lot of pilots want to do that. Maybe you want to fly internationally, go to Mexico or Canada or the Bahamas. We're going to have to wait for a few borders to open for that. But or perhaps it's a really grand idea, flying coast to coast in your aircraft and visiting all 50 states, or completing a pilot passport program in your state. Or it doesn't even have to be that grand. Maybe it's flying the family for that first trip to the grandparents' house or to the beach or somewhere else. That's a goal. So set the goal and then work backwards to figure out, what do I need to do to achieve it? Do I need to look at getting an instrument rating? Can I afford to do that? Can I make this a VFR only trip? What else can I do? And then other things, aspirations to do better at X. Maybe you can't keep that center line. No matter how hard you try, it eludes you. And you just need to get out and practice more often. Maybe do some drills and some skill building to get that. Or perhaps it's holding an altitude. Or perhaps it's using the new avionics stack in your aircraft or the new aircraft that you're renting. So that is something that you can look at to set how you want to do that. So we've talked a little bit about the details, and that again is going to be dependent on the budget.
Yeah, so no matter how you look at it, whether you own your own airplane or you're renting, or if you're a student, flying is not cheap. Every time that engine's running, it's costing money. Whether it's costing a lot of money or a little bit of money can kind of depend on how you choose to go about it and how you're able to go about it. And as John said, and as we mentioned before, as you're setting up this plan for proficiency, for most of us, money is probably something that we're concerned about. And I find for me with this goal that I had last year, but wasn't able to quite accomplish it as I wanted to, didn't really have it written down, didn't make it a New Year's resolution type goal as I have this year. But this idea I have of flying once a week and flying at least an hour once a week is going to cost a lot of money. But because it's a priority in my life and I'm able to make it a priority in my life, I am trying to budget for it. But I can't do it exactly how I want. So for most of last year, I've been renting a 172. I don't own my own airplane, and I've been renting a 172 out of in Southern California. So, you know, as things are in big cities, it's expensive to rent here. It's $175 an hour to rent a 172 locally where I am. And I knew that trying to accomplish this goal of flying once a week with that cost was not going to be realistic, because if I wanted to fly once a week with that, it would cost $9,100, which just was far too high for me. So what I did is I went and got checked out in the 152. And since I'm flying mostly by myself right now anyway, because of, you know, the state of the world, and I love the 152 because it's very fun, even though it is, you know, a little slower, a little less powerful. I knew that I would be able to make my money go further, be able to fly more by getting checked out in that. So that brings the price down for an hour a week for the entire year down to a more reasonable $6,240, which is about $520 a month, which when you break it down month by month, and again, I'm lucky enough to be able to prioritize this in my life, it's a reasonable cost for me. So I would love to say, you know, I'm going to fly 1,000 hours this year for fun, and I'm going to do it in a Super Cub on floats after I get my float rating and, you know, make it rain. But that's not realistic for me. So what I'm trying to do is set up my proficiency plan in a way that I can achieve, because I have had lofty goals in the past and haven't been able to reach them, but they also weren't realistic. So I would say, as you're getting this set up, do it in a way that's realistic, and you won't become discouraged if you know, miss a week or two, or feel like, oh, I'm not making any progress. I feel like with check rides, sometimes too, people will say, I need to have my check ride done by this, or they'll compare themselves to their peers and say, well, this person got their check ride done. But I find it really helpful to just, you know, look at yourself, look at your goals, and just move forward from there. And yeah, if you do this and look down and get serious about how much money you can or are willing to spend on this, you'll be able to create a plan that works for you much more easily.
I think one of the things that is very important in doing that is actually putting it on the calendar and committing to it. I have had grandiose plans in the past, and I have not spent my proficiency budget. It's gone elsewhere. Again, life intervenes. But if I have scheduled the airplane, if I've put it on my calendar, there's a better chance of it happening. And if I can plug it in among all the different things that I do outside of flying, outside of aviation, then I have a better chance of achieving it. And that will work. So we talked about the sample plan. I'm talking about trying to get a seaplane rating. Alicia has that goal as well. I don't know if it's going to happen this year for her or not. I'm hoping it's going to happen this year for me. I'm going to make that work. I've got to get that scheduled. I probably need to do that pretty quickly if I want to get a decent shot at it. But then beyond that, I'd like to get tailwheel current again. I'd like to maybe start working on a gyrocopter rating. I think those look pretty cool and kind of fun to fly. So lots of things that I need to do, kind of budget out there. Plus, I need to still go back and work on my skills and work on the things that I'm weak in. In my intro slide, you saw a couple pictures there of my kids, my daughter, and my son. The picture with my son was this last weekend, and it was a great flight. We went to a nearby airport to have lunch with a buddy of mine I hadn't seen in a while. It was a windy, bumpy day, and I looked at the weather and thought, okay, yeah, I can go fly. It's not a big deal. It should be fine. Where it was smooth, it was a headwind, and I had a ground speed of like 65 knots, which wasn't a big deal. I mean, it was only 65 miles to the airport we were going to. But if I dropped down 1,000 feet, I could bump along. And so I asked my son, do you want to drop down and bump along? Yeah, okay. But I noticed that I was having a lot of trouble maintaining my altitude and maintaining my heading and trying to do that. So even though I fly regularly, I need to work at what I'm doing and get out there and go to the gym and do my thing. So some of the tips and tricks and resources we have here, we talk about a lot about the flight proficiency, but there's a mental game to this. And there are a lot of things that you can do for that. Of course, obviously, attending a webinar, viewing webinars is a good way to do that. I'll throw out something here from our colleagues over on the You Can Fly side of the house. You may not know this, but on the second and fourth Tuesdays of every month at 7 p.m. Eastern, there's an Ask an Ambassador program. So we have 3 regional ambassadors across the country: Kay Sundram in California, Jamie Beckett in Florida, and Pat Brown down in Texas. And they're all CFIs. They'll talk about any kind of topic you want to talk about, and you can get some more Q&A with them. Plus, there's lots of other folks out on the web that will do things, that can do things for you. So spending the time on the ground, as flight instructors, Alicia and I tell students all the time, hey, your next lesson, we're going to talk about landings. I need you to go read this section in the airplane flying handbook and come back having read that, and here's some questions I want you to think about before our next flight. And if they come back and they haven't read it, that makes it a lot more difficult to get out there and actually teach them. We're going to spend more time on the ground. We're probably not going to get everything done in the airplane that we want to, because we're trying to get that basic knowledge in there ahead of time. It's the same thing for those of us that have passed check rides and are now flying. And when we're planning for things, we need to spend the time ahead of time to look at that. I mentioned I was out of flying for 7 years, and just the advances in avionics were incredible. There are things that there are simulators that you can get. You can put on your iPad or put on your computer. You can use those to help you learn the buttonology. If you have access to an actual simulator, whether it's a desktop simulator or even a standalone stand-up simulator, those are great for learning some of that stuff too. So work on that, and then have a plan for every flight. We're talking about a lot of different things here, but if you're going out and you're flying weekly, maybe this week we're working on landings. Maybe next week we're going to work on navigation, and maybe we're going to work on navigation that we haven't used in a while, pilotage and dead reckoning. I remember in college being on the flight team, we had a navigation challenge as part of the NIFA flight competitions, and that's a good thing to do. You plot it out, calculate all the stuff that your tablet or your EFB will do for you, or your panel mounted GPS. Yes, Saturday, direct to the other airport and try to figure it out. Initially, I had intended to scratch it all out, put it on a nav log, calculate everything by hand. I did have a chart with me with a line drawn and hash marks across it to mark my checkpoints, but I got wrapped up in other things and didn't get that done, and so I just bagged that and went and flew. Not the next time I go fly. I'm going to work on going to some grass strips that I can't find and see if I can find them and see how well I do meeting my goals there. And going to the gym, Jason Miller, one of our colleagues, is a great guy. He uses this term, going to the gym. He's talking about skill building and breaking down the maneuvers that we're doing and using some skill building exercises to help hone what you're trying to do. As an example, if you're working on stalls, maybe doing a series of falling leaps will help you try to maintain your heading as you're doing that. Keep the wings level, all of that kind of stuff as you're going through and using that. If you're having trouble with crosswind landings, dragging the runway is a good technique that you can use. Now, I'm not going to tell you to go out there just do it on your own. I would definitely recommend getting with an instructor and making sure you understand what needs to happen there, but focus on that and drill on that and evaluate what you're doing. We have a program we launched a couple years ago called the Focused Flight Review, and that is something that we think is a pretty good plan. We put it together, and it gives you some pre-flight material to look at, go through, and it's about an hour's worth of material to read, look at, view, and then you come back and you discuss all the topics and another list of topics with your flight instructor before you go fly. And then there's a specific flight profile that you can go fly with your instructor to work on specific areas, things like weather and controlled flight into terrain avoidance, or takeoffs and landings and go-arounds. Whole flight review focused on that. And while we call it a focused flight review with the intent that you would use it for a flight review, you don't have to wait every 2 years to do it. Do one every 6 months. Grab it and just make that date on your calendar. Get out with your CFI and go fly. There's information for them to look at, so they are familiar with what you're going to be doing. We have doubling up on there, and that's kind of an issue right now with the pandemic. Basically, what that is if you are running out of a flight school, or if you're in flight training yourself right now, doubling up is the process of a student riding in the back during another student's instructional flight and kind of observing what's going on and benefiting from that instruction. You may not feel comfortable doing that. I know I saw a question pop up talking about what kind of preventive measures should we take for flight instruction during the pandemic. I will tell you, here at AOPA, we have a very specific set of sanitization rules that we follow before and after the flight. We wear masks in the cockpit, and yes, it does make it a little difficult sometimes to speak and understand each other, but in general, I haven't had a whole lot of problems with that. So if you're comfortable doing that, by all means, definitely do that. And then, of course, we talked about simulators being a very good opportunity if you have access to them, to learn some things, to work on some things that you might not want to do in the airplane. One of the things that I use that I have, it's from a company called Pilot Workshops. Many of you may be familiar with them. It is their pilot exercise program. It's a book with 15 different exercises in it designed to help sharpen your flying skills. And they do a very good job of putting good write-up in there, and they give you a set of standards and a checklist to go against. And they also recommend that you have somebody in the airplane with you that can fill out that checklist while you're actually flying the exercises. And I think that's a really good idea to do. There's several of them that I've done. That navigation exercise is one of them, dragging the runway is another. And they tell you, they give you some suggestions if you want to do it in a simulator, how you can pump it up, in their words, and get more out of it. So I would recommend taking a look at that. But you can also put something together yourself. Just pull out the ACS or PTS, or open up your copy of the airplane flying handbook or helicopter flying handbook if you're not an airplane pilot, or whatever it is you fly, and pull some maneuvers you haven't done. In my column in CFI to CFI, I specifically said I'm going to go back and revisit my commercial maneuvers. So at some point during this year, I'm going to get out there, lazy eights on and around pylons, chandelles, steep spirals, all the fun stuff, and get back out there and kind of work on that and see if I can get better at those. So it's been a while, actually been a long while, but the first thing I have to do is make it a habit.
Exactly. So as we're going through and making this plan and talking about the steps that you can take to make your plan, we've talked about how assessing your currency, we've talked about developing your personal minimums, creating a goal, and working and creating a budget in a way that you can do that. And you're already at this point well on your way to making proficiency a habit, but here are some tips to, make that process easier. Something that I do and that I have done in the past and will continue to do now is have a standing rental and a time to fly. And this idea actually came to me from one of my favorite checkouts that I ever did back in North Carolina, from a pilot who, and this was, years and years before I started working for the Air Safety Institute, but he had done the Rusty Pilots course and was just the sweetest, nicest older gentleman who every Wednesday at 7:30 in the morning would be at the airport to go fly for an hour, and he was there every single week and just had the best time, and it really stuck with me. And since then I've tried to do that myself as well, and I just can't recommend that strongly enough, that if you put it in your plan to go once a week or once every 2 weeks and just have it set up, and seriously, like out of flight school, or if you rent, or if you have your own plane, like literally put it in your calendar, and you'll be more likely to go follow through on that. And then if the weather's bad, all you have to do is say, oh, the weather's bad, I couldn't go. But if the weather's good, then everything's ready. Except for you have to go pre-flight, make sure you're okay to go and stuff. But if you take care of committing the time to it already, you're far more likely to go. Something else I like to do is to start or end my flight with pattern work. I don't like the idea, and I think it's kind of silly to think of yourself as, as we said at the beginning of this presentation, if you're on day 89 and, are you really, you are not proficient, you are hanging on to currency by a thread. That should not be good enough for you. It should not be good enough for you to take passengers. You should hold yourself to a higher standard. And so something that I like to do with every flight is to end it pretty much. I always end it with 3 landings. And the other day I was coming back, and we have pretty consistent weather out here for the most part, but the winds had shifted and they were gusty and there was a crosswind. We were landing on, we normally land on 2.9, we were landing on 1.1 this day, and I was, maybe a little, I wasn't nervous, but I was like, oh, we're landing on the other runway, like maybe I'll just make it a full stop. And then catching myself in that thought, I was thinking, wow, I really need to do more practice on this runway with this wind, because I haven't done this in a very long time. And having that thought of, oh, maybe I should just land, was kind of a red flag to me for myself to say, no, actually, this is a great reason why you should stay up and stay in the pattern and get comfortable on this runway again, because it shouldn't be an issue to adjust to that, of course. Something else I like to do, and something that you can do with proficiency, and especially if you're not comfortable going with an instructor right now, it's going to be up to you to go from where you are now to where you want to be, but do that in a safe way. And so you'll need to do that with like little building blocks of steps. So don't go do some big trip that you don't feel ready for just because you're like, this trip's going to make me proficient. Do that in chunks and stuff. So the other day, as an example of what I was doing, as I mentioned before, I've just been doing a bunch of local flying because I haven't had the opportunity for the most part to get out of the LA area because of the pandemic and just life. It's hard to go stay in a hotel right now, go stay overnight somewhere else. Like, that's not super realistic. So I wanted to go on a cross country, and I was going to try to go up to Big Bear and see the snow, but there was low level wind shear and like these really strong winds coming over the mountains. And I said, this is a bummer. I was ready for that flight. I could go do another local flight here. But I really wanted to work on my cross country stuff, but I don't feel like kind of like how John was saying, like, I don't feel like doing another whole plan right now. And it was a game time decision to not go. And I only had the plane for a certain amount of time. So I said to myself, well, I still want to practice getting flight following, going through that process of talking to SoCal and being in their system and going to a different airport. So what I did is I just went to an airport that is on the coast and that all I had to do was, follow the coast to get to, but I still had to go through the flight following process that I wanted to get some more proficiency in. And that was very comfortable for me, but it also was a little bit more pressure, because it wasn't just that I'm going to go to the practice area and fly around. It was, well, you're going to get more out of this flight by getting that practice in with SoCal approach and getting flight following than you are just going and doing steep turns over the lighthouse again. So that was pushing myself a little bit, but not to the point where I was overwhelmed and task saturated. So do something like that with yourself, find something that you're comfortable with. So I was very comfortable with the route. I was comfortable with where I was going. There was nothing challenging about the airport. But the thing that I was pushing myself on with a little bit, again, just because I haven't been doing it much lately, is talking to SoCal and getting flight following. So a comfort thing and then an uncomfortable thing, and put them together, and you will be on the road to proficiency. Something else to do is fly instrument approaches in your normal flying. I'm sure my fellow instrument rated pilots know that feeling of, oh man, I got to go get 6 approaches right now, or I'm going to have to do an IPC. And IPCs are expensive. If you do an IP, I know that you can do them, in an hour, but if you do an IPC right, it should take more than that. To get proficient in instrument flying takes more than an hour, and that's going to cost a lot of money in an airplane and with an instructor. And again, going back to the budget thing, if you get an IPC, that's going to be at least a couple $100 of paying the instructor alone, and so that's going to eat into your budget. But if you work this into your normal flying, the flying that you do already, it's going to be so much easier to maintain that currency and that proficiency in the long run. So again, with this flight I did the other day, I was already talking to SoCal. All I had to do is say, hi, can I do the practice ILS back in? Can I do the practice GPS? And the worst thing that can happen is they say, we're too busy, no separation services provided. And if you get overwhelmed or flustered, just say, I, just want to fly VFR. And again, I wasn't doing this in actual at all, but again, just working that into my normal flying is going to make it so much easier and just more cost effective and safer. Honestly, just working this into normal flying is so much better than just doing like big chunks of instrument flying and then nothing, and then big chunks and then nothing. If you do it more consistently, you'll be more proficient. And to going back to another point from the beginning that we talked about this advisory circular and manual flight after automation failure, we live in a wonderful time where there are very, very wonderful, very, very capable airplanes, where the capability of the airplane often is, potentially greater than the skill level of the pilot. So when your plane is doing everything for you, you need to make sure that if something fails, you can hop in and take over. So if you get in this habit of using your fancy system to fly the approach for you, there should be at no point should you not be able to step in and take over that approach. And practice this, seriously, practice this. If you fly in your own airplane and you are doing your approaches with autopilot, which is fine, there should still be times where you're hand flying approaches, and you should and I also would strongly encourage you to go with a safety pilot and hand fly them under the hood, because the plane, I feel like people can get into such comfort with the capability of their airplane that they forget what to do when that fails. And I would just strongly recommend to hand fly approaches. And again, it's just such good practice, and it's going to make you a better pilot. And if you're thinking right now, I don't want to do that, why would I do that? That's a red flag. That means you should probably do that. If you have any doubts about whether or not you could hand fly an approach and you're flying instruments, you should go do that immediately and prove me wrong. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox about that. But we're so lucky that we have all these resources around us to help make us proficient, and to help us maintain our proficiency. But it's up to us really to use them and make sure that we're making the most of our resources. And something that I love about the community, and especially as we've switched to doing so many things online, is that I reached out to my Instagram followers and got some tips from them and said, hey friends, how do you stay proficient? And I got actually quite a few answers, and I was super pleased about that. And the vast majority, because it consistently said, go fly. That's what you should do. Go fly. Go use your resources. There's a pilot in a CFI in Florida called Sarah who said that she does what I do to schedule a flight every week. And then Zach, a pilot in the Southern California area, brought up a really good point also about using your resources, that even once you have your certificate, keep a dialogue going with a trusted CFI about decision making. Because again, like, none of us are on our own with this. And you're not on your own with this decision making, and you can reach out to people and like keep that dialogue going. And again, just always reach out to people and always be using your resources. And John can tell us more about these resources.
Well, I think you touched on that fifth one down there, your CFI, and definitely establish that relationship and have several of them, because we're not infallible. So you want to have a wide circle of friends that you can trust and get information from. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention the Wings program. It is a good program. You can use that to kind of pace yourself in doing this, and it will select specific tasks for you to work on with a flight instructor. Also, of course, attending things like this webinar and other online courses and seminars and webinars will count for the knowledge tasks required for a phase of the Wings program. But you can certainly do that. FAAsafety.gov is where you want to go to find out more information about that. We talked earlier about the focused flight review, but the technology helps. There was a gentleman earlier was asking about, talking about a specific GPS navigator. But yeah, you certainly want to go online to the manufacturer's website, get the information that they have. A lot of them have simulators that you can download and that you can work with and you can play with. I have a standalone simulator here that I'm able to go out to. Has a replica of a GTN 650 in it, which is what we happen to have on our aircraft here at AOPA. And I'm able to go in there and I can play with it. I can figure out, all right, why couldn't I get the flight plan to load the last time I was flying and bouncing along? And I missed this step here, because now I'm sitting on the ground, comfortable. I can look at the manual, look at the box, and make the inputs and learn how to do it. I'd forgotten. Okay, it happens. Talk about past experience. So I've listed a few things there: poker runs, the Air Race Classic, fly-ins, stuff like that. If you have done stuff like that in the past, I mentioned the flight team competition. You can rely on that. Go back and look at how did you do that? What did you do? And then challenge yourself with something similar. If you had a great run, if you had a great score on the last poker run, go sign up for the next one. And then, Alicia, you brought up a really good thing here, the flying accountability partners. That's pretty important, I think.
Oh, definitely.
So tell us a little bit about those.
So I'm lucky enough to have a couple of close friends and people in my life that I am able to talk about flying with frequently, and they give me a hard time when I don't fly. I have no excuses out here for the most part. I'm a flight instructor. The weather's beautiful. I can see a beautiful clear sky outside right now. I'm not dealing with icing and snow and anything like that, and I have someone who will give me a super hard time if I don't go fly, once a week. If there's a 2-week period where I'm not flying, I'm definitely going to hear about it. I'll definitely hear, well, when are you flying next? What are you doing? Why aren't you flying? This doesn't make any sense to me. Which is great and definitely encourages me to fly. And just having friends in the online community, honestly, it's so fun to see people. I really enjoy taking pictures and posting them on Instagram and seeing other people's flying adventures and stuff, and even talking about it with other pilots and at ASI. It's so fun. When our colleagues are flying, we're flying today on a really cool flight in New York City, and I was, jealous. I was like, this is great. I wish I was flying. That seems awesome. Sure. And so seeing that, really does inspire me to go fly more. I love seeing other people's adventures. I love seeing what other people are doing. And there is a little twinge of, ooh, I haven't flown in a while, and like these people are flying. I need to go fly. How dare they have fun while I'm on the ground and stuff. But definitely having that friend, that person in your life who will support you and push you to keep flying and go flying and give you a hard time when you don't. It's so important. So find that person for yourself who's there to tell you, go fly. What are you doing?
So we're pushing up against the hour. I'd like to do a little quick wrap up, and then we've got a lot of questions that are coming in. So we'll probably go past 8 o'clock for those of you that are looking at the time. Let me say this real briefly. You can send an email directly to me. It was in your registration email if you need the webinar badge code, if you have to log off. Plus, you'll be able to watch the video. It'll be at the very end of it. Wings credit will also go out, so don't worry about that. If you didn't sign up using your Wings email, again, the email address that was in your registration email, send in your Wings address, and then we'll go ahead and take care of that. So I just want to get that out before people start dropping off the webinar. But again, when you're going through and you're talking about planning for proficiency, definitely start by assessing your currency and take a good hard look at it and be realistic about where you're current, where you're not current, and what you need to do and what your goal is for the year. You may be instrument rated. This may not be the year you get instrument current and proficient, but you can work towards that. You can be better VFR. Develop your personal minimums and adjust those as needed. And again, fill it out in pencil, sign it in ink so you're not paying for it in blood, please. And share those, right? Share those with people. Work towards something. Have a goal in mind that you want to achieve. And again, be realistic. You may not get all the way there this year, but you're going to get a lot farther if you start working on it now than if you just sit back and dream about it. Budget, I think we beat that one to death, but definitely be realistic about a budget. And in being realistic about a budget, make proficiency a habit. Get that on the calendar. Be realistic. Get it in there as often as you can, and then use your resources. We talk about the budget, but there are a lot of free things that you can do. A lot of stuff online. That circle of friends, that circle of flying friends, the accountability partners. Use them. Your flight instructors, if you buy them a cup of coffee, a flight instructor will talk to you all day long, most of the time.
Bribe them with food.
Yeah. No, seriously. But do reach out to them. Do talk to them, and pick their brains and ask them the tough questions. As I grimace at that, but yeah, ask them tough questions. Force them to go into the books. That's something I have to do. So. Paul Darris has been our producer behind the scenes, and he's been kind of triaging the questions that have come in. Paul, what do you have lined up for us here?
Hi, John. Hi, Alicia. Great show tonight. Thank you. So some of the questions we're seeing here about the pandemic, pilots concerned about not being able to find a flight school or instructors willing to fly with them due to the social distancing requirements. What can you recommend for pilots who want to get proficient and are comfortable doing that, but they can't find someone else to do it with them in the cockpit?
That's going to be a real challenge, and that's stating the obvious. But it's that you may be limited to doing some work in the simulator if you can find one of those, if you have access to one. If you can't find somebody that's willing to fly with you, the easy answer is you travel somewhere and find it, but that's not the easy answer right now, as Alicia can tell us. I mean, being in LA and Southern California, it's a little difficult. I don't have a good answer. I wish I did. Fortunate enough that where I am here in the Mid-Atlantic, for the most part, as long as we're following the sanitization rules, we're wearing the masks, and we're comfortable with it. And my students have asked them, "Are you comfortable doing this? Do you want to do it?" The picture that was with my son, of course, we've been in the same house for the last 2 months together before we went back to school. you know, I felt very comfortable with. Of course, we got out of the airplane, walked into the restaurant, the masks were on, and we're sitting there doing so. It's going to be tough to find it. And I just keep plugging away and keep looking for people. Get online and see if you can reach out to that circle of friends or to the, you know, other pilots around that might be willing to go fly and to, you know, maybe they're current and they can help you. You know, you can you can't claim instruction from you know, somebody that's a private pilot, but if they're willing to let you fly the airplane for a little bit, you can certainly do that. I would caution though, if you're going to do that, and this goes back to my second lesson as a CFI, learning to be a CFI, where I went to another airport and made 7 go-arounds because I just couldn't get my hands and feet and eyes coordinated enough to land the darn thing from the right seat. Yeah, it was a bad day. There was a crosswind too, so I'll blame it on the winds, but not really. I was just having a hard time. But if you've not done that before, I caution you, if you think about going out and doing that, I would probably say don't do it. Try to find a flight instructor that can help you.
Right. Another question is, you talked about the difficulty right now with you know, budgeting and you know, the cost effectiveness of being proficient is always a challenge. So what about flying clubs? Is that an option for people to look into?
Yeah, it certainly is. I think it depends on if there's a flying club nearby, if it's something that you want to be involved with, if they have planes that you want to fly. And of course, there's always the option of starting your own flying club. I've looked into joining one out here, but unfortunately, the experience I've heard from a couple of people I know in flying clubs is that they have difficulty renting the airplane, and that they have to book it even in the flying club weeks and weeks in advance, and that just doesn't work with my schedule because I you know, if we have meetings pop up, then I, you know, cancel my flight and save it for another day. And that would not be realistic for me to say, okay, well, I'll just fly again in 3 weeks when I can get the airplane again. But I've definitely thought about starting my own flying club out here to
I
sort
know
of
somebody
take
out
care of
there that
that
can help
cost.
you.
No, I know, I should, I know. Ugh, I just talk about it all the time, but it is a great idea. It is a great option. And it's definitely worth looking into for those who want to fly more and are budget conscious, but don't, and also don't necessarily want to get into the full responsibility of ownership on their own. And that's also something that's a leap I want to take, but I think it would be maybe easier if I did it with the support of a flying club or something like that.
Okay, great. That's really all the questions I had for both of you. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. If there was a question you had that didn't get answered, we'll try to get that. Yeah, there's our question. There's Alicia's float plane there. That's one she wants to go get. Yeah. So I talked a little bit about the AOPA Pilot Passport Badge Program, and you can earn the January webinar badge. This is the code for it, ASI Web 011421. That's today's date. This will be valid until February 18th, 2021, which happens to coincide with our next ASI safety webinar, where we will have Dr. Penny Levin come back. Penny is a practicing clinical psychologist, and she's going to take a look at the human factors perspective of situational awareness. So February 18th at 7 p.m., please join us for that. But if you haven't used the AOPA app, the Pilot Passport, before, let me show you how you can redeem your affiliate code. So you need to go into the affiliate code section and redeem the badge. Go to the app on your device, and in the upper left-hand corner, you can click on the menu and then tap on Pilot Passport. And when that opens up, My Pilot Passport. Then when that page opens up, scroll down on the My Points and Badges screen, scroll down to Redeem Affiliate Code. Down at the bottom there, you see the yellow circle around that, and tap on that. And then enter the webinar code and hit Redeem Code, and you'll get that. So remember, again, redeem that code by February 18th. It will not be accessible on the 18th, so you got to get it by the 17th, actually. So the day of the next webinar, it goes away. Trust me, I tried trying to get the December one, and I forgot to do it, and I couldn't get it. So I lost out on the badge and 1,000 points. So if you're collecting that stuff and you're trying to get ahead on the leaderboard, by all means, go ahead and do that. And there it is again, ASI Web 011421, and enter that in the Redeem Affiliate Code section. You'll get that badge. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate your participation in this. Here at ASI, we believe that pilots that regularly take and consume safety content are actually, in fact, safer pilots. We're still trying to prove that, but we think that's a pretty good thesis. All of our safety education is funded primarily through donations to the AOPA Foundation. So if you've enjoyed this program, you've enjoyed some of our other materials, by all means, if you're feeling so inclined, please go to aopafoundation.org and click on the donate link there. We would really appreciate it. Also, if you are not an AOPA member, I would encourage you to join. You can go to aopa.org/join today, and we will be happy to sign you up as a member. I started flying in '84, I soloed in '86, and I became a member 3 weeks after I soloed. So I've been a member longer than I've been an employee. I don't own the company, thank goodness. But I do enjoy being an AOPA member, and I really enjoy being an AOPA employee. And on behalf of all of us here at AOPA and the Air Safety Institute, my colleagues Paul and Alicia, thank you for watching, and fly safe.